the middle of the Pacific with engine trouble. They sent a second plane and it had problems as well. So we only just got Joe, but he's come here all the way from Washington at his own expense to defend Julian Assange and Wikileaks. And I think that's a really big thing. And we really need to let the light in. That's the name of this song. This is made specially for WikiLeaks and Julian. So Alex Hills from New Zealand is the co-violinist. There are two violinists on the song. It's such a beautiful song. I did the clip for it because there was some sort of footage of them, you know, doing some actions, but it's so beautiful. I thought, well, this could be a hit outside of the movement even. But Alex is going to play live third violin for you. So Alex, I'd like you, when it's time, that you would just drift over and get in front of that room camera. I'm still in my director's mode, but Kitty, can you now send the streamed clip? And I will introduce the other guests as they arrive. Excuse me, no, I can't do that. James Cogan from the Socialist Equality Party. So James was supposed to be here on the 9th of August. He was on our program and he couldn't make it. But on the line, we have former Australian Ambassador Tony Kevin, who is, you know, he has really stepped up to help Julian, who is stranded in that embassy now since June 2012. And he hasn't ever been charged with a crime. These people are going to say so much more than me. But the boy's health is failing. I say boy because I'm a lot older than him. But, you know, it's just so inhumane. And there's always a dodge to keep the threat up. But he's never been charged anywhere. You'll hear people even calling him a whistleblower. He's not. He's a journalist. You'll hear people in Australia calling him a hacker. No, he's a journalist, and WikiLeaks is a publishing house. It is a place of last resort for people who, you know, in government and corporations who want to tell the truth. And that's what we have to defend, because that is so important for our democracy moving forward, not only in Australia, but all around the world. So one more person, an amazing Australian independent journalist, Caitlin Johnson from Melbourne. So Tony and Caitlin will be joining us live for the Q&A, but we knew there was going to be renovations here. We knew that we could expect trouble. So I have pre-recorded those two speakers, so you're not going to miss out. The world is not going to miss out on them. But without further ado now, please welcome Alex Hills from New Zealand to the stage, for want of a better word. Okay, Kitty, it will come up. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we are going to go straight to Mr. Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News, who is also streaming this event live through the Consortium News website. Joe, he hosts the Unity for Day Vigils now, and we've had some amazing guests on. And is that Arthur Chesterfield Evans? He was on the vigil last week, and I'm not quite a regular as well. They can't get rid of me. But I'd love Joe to talk to you now. He's come all this way. Let's give him a round of applause and welcome Joe.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cathy. I am here. I made it. Yes, in one piece. Anybody can hear me now? Okay. I've got several microphones I have to speak into. So I'm happy to be moving my head maybe now. I think I'll be fine here. So thank you, Cathy, for organizing this, and for everyone who showed up here. It's very good to see people here in Sydney supporting the work of Wikileaks and defending someone who should not be in the situation he's in. This is an historic press freedom case. This is how I became more involved and started to host the vigils. See, there's three now. I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth, apparently. I don't know. Unfortunately, most members of the media, when they once profited from WikiLeaks' work, have turned against WikiLeaks and Assange in particular, and they've made it personal as well. They smeared him, which is what people in power do when they are being challenged and they don't really have a response. They make it personal and attack, and he has been very much the brunt of those attacks. And it's quite a shame to see that happening, because they call themselves journalists, but they're failing, and that's the reason why we need whistleblowers and WikiLeaks. The title of this event is Whistleblowers, WikiLeaks, and the Future of Democracy. When I thought about that, I could only think about the past of democracy. I mean, how much we've had and how little seems to be remaining. And I don't exaggerate. We take for granted in the Western countries, and even though you aren't in the West here in Australia, you're lumped in pretty much with the West, Western culture. We take for granted that we have a democracy simply because our leaders tell us we do, and we remember when we had more rights, we have elections, and that's supposed to be it. And we've got a free market economy, and they conflate democracy with free markets, and they're really nothing to do with one another. And if you don't believe that, just look at Pinochet's Chile, which was the test case for the neoliberal project of the Chicago School, and that was without any question, military dictatorship, but they had the most freest markets to that time, and it's now spread all over the world, and that's what we're facing. That has led to incredible amounts of inequality on levels maybe the West hasn't seen since the Gilded Age in the US, the 1920s, and this is a really, really huge problem that the middle class seems to be evaporating before our eyes, and the money is transferred to the 1% through a variety of means, including privatization, deregulation, the use of international financial institutions to cut back on social spending. So if we think that we still have a democracy or our democracies are not under threat, that is one sign that it is under threat, maybe even on life support, the existence of this incredible economic inequality. But even worse maybe is what we've learned, and what shocked many people, even in the mainstream, and they published the stories, but it seemed to have gone away. And it's just part of the fabric of our societies and culture. We seem to accept, I'm not talking about the people in this room, I'm talking about the vast majority of peoples in our countries, and particularly in the corporate media. And I'm talking about surveillance, warrantless mass surveillance of our citizens. And of course, this was revealed in a shocking way, confirming what many suspected by, of course, Edward Snowden. And others before him as well. But Snowden really had the motherlode of the information that let us know what exactly our electronic and other intelligence agencies are doing to keep monitoring, not necessarily in live way, but they record everything that's going on, including this event. I mean, anything that's on the web is being stored, and if they need to look up somebody's name, you know, it'll be archived there. So this is beyond chilling and beyond a confirmation of 1984, whose book sales, by the way, spiked when the Snowden story came out. Everyone rushed to the bookstore, the library, to read Orwell again. And what they read there was a confirmation that this dystopia that he had predicted was pretty much happening. And as I say, this we accept it now. The mainstream accepts this, even if they were shocked at first and reported on that. There's also the existence of war, a permanent war. This was also part of Orwell, if you recall, in the book. There was always in the background some report going on about another war that was going on and that the UK was involved in, and it was just sort of breathing in with the day's air, because it wasn't a shock or a crisis at home. These wars were abroad; they don't come home to our countries, even if many of our young men and women are fighting and dying in them, in the same way that the Second World War, for example, or Vietnam War came home. We just sort of accept this with surveillance, that we're constantly at war, and I'm speaking about the US in particular. And what I've learned from my Australian friends and colleagues is how much Australia is under the thumb of the US. So many of the things that I say about the US probably pertain here as well, unfortunately. And the last one, I think, in terms of why I think we're losing our democracy, and I don't know, even if it doesn't seem that way, because we're being told that we're just as democratic as we always were, ignoring what I'm saying right now, is a word I don't like to use because I think it's overused, but it's the C word, censorship. It is something that, you thought I was going to say something else, did you? No. Censorship is, you know, in the US, we have, everyone knows this, the First Amendment of the Constitution, which was back in 1789 ratified, and part of the Bill of Rights. It was very much, of course, a reaction to the British government that the US had overthrown and kicked out. So there was a lot of good things in that Constitution. And the First Amendment is always cited as proof that there is freedom of speech in the US, and freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. Now, I don't know when they started it, but assembly, if you want to have a protest anywhere in any major US city, you need to get the police's permission first, and they can deny it. So I don't know what kind of freedom of assembly that is. But see, that's what I'm saying. Whatever I say about the US is probably going to pertain to Australia. So so the government cannot exercise what's called prior restraint. They cannot tell a newspaper or a television station or even an internet site, in advance, you cannot publish this. That is the extent of it. After publication, they could prosecute you. This was made clear in the Pentagon Papers case, when Daniel Ellsberg copied the Pentagon Papers, and he first wanted to go to Congress and have someone read it into the congressional record, because under a clause in the Constitution, no member of the U.S. Congress can be questioned about anything he or she says in the middle of a legislative act, whether that's in the Capitol building in Washington or anywhere they might meet. And he or she cannot be questioned going to or from this legislative act. So in other words, anybody in the U.S. Congress can pass whatever they want and face no consequences whatsoever, not legally anyway. So Ellsberg, realizing this, went to various members of Congress, and they kept turning him down. George McGovern being one of them, because he was running for president, and they didn't want to touch this. As much as McGovern and the congressmen that he went to were opposed the Vietnam War, they didn't want to read the Pentagon Papers, put it into congressional record. And Ellsberg told me in an interview I did with him back in 2008 that it dawned on him that he thought Congress would act first and then the press would report on it, but he realized it was the other way around, that he had to go to the press. And when the congressmen read something in the newspapers, they would, and their constituents were riled up about it, then they have to act. So he went to the press and he got the New York Times and the Washington Post to start publish it. And it was at that moment that the Department of Justice under Nixon told them to stop publishing. And they did, but they sued and they got to the Supreme Court. And the night before the Supreme Court decision, the papers were given to a senator who did read them into the congressional record, senator who's forgotten now, even in the US, Senator Mike Gravel of Alaska at the time. And now Mike's been on our vigils. He's a friend of mine because I wrote a book with him about that and other things he did in Congress back in 2008 when he briefly ran in the primary, Democratic primary against some woman called Hillary, what's her name? Hillary Clinton, that's it. Hillary Clinton. Oh yeah, well, okay. And a guy called Barack something. Well, he got up on the stage with them and I was in the auditorium for a lot of those debates. So Mike read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record. And as I said, he could not be charged for that. However, he knew that he'd pay a big political price, not being named to the right committees, never being able to run for president himself, although he did many, many years later. He read them into, and then very next day, that morning, the Supreme Court decided that the Nixon administration was wrong. They could not stop the publication in advance. But in that decision, the majority opinion of the Supreme Court was that after publication, they could arrest or prosecute anyone they wanted for publishing classified information. This is why I worry about Julian Assange, because legally they have the ability to do this under the Espionage Act. Even just possession and dissemination of classified material is forbidden. It's a horrible act, but it's on the books. But no government has done this because of the sentiment of the First Amendment. The government should not be seen to be doing this, even if they can, and no government has. So Nixon didn't go after Gravel when he published it as a book later on, not as a legislative act. And no government in the US or any president, Obama wanted to go after Assange, and they looked at it and they realized if they prosecuted him, that the New York Times and CNN and all the big media also publish classified information all the time that they're given. So they would be liable. So they backed off. They called it their New York Times problem. So they let the idea of prosecuting Assange go. But this Trump administration, with this thuggish former CIA director and now Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, it could be a different story. Now, I say all this because the government cannot do the prior restraint, but they work with Facebook, with Google, with company Twitter that are private companies, pressure them in open committee hearings on television to go after people for saying things that are considered to be dissent, that are a threat to rulers who don't want even a little spark of dissent to grow up, because they know that the society, at least in the US, is a tinderbox with a very angry population, and a protest movement can swell up very, very quickly. And they understand that. They've studied this, so they want to stop it right there and prevent people from publishing and saying things that are considered dangerous to the rulers' interests, such as WikiLeaks revealing crimes and corruption of our rulers. I'm going to finish now. I'm going on. I didn't realize I'd say so much about the Pentagon Papers, although it is relevant. That it's the failure of the media to do its job that makes, unfortunately, the necessity for whistleblowers and WikiLeaks. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need Julian Assange. We wouldn't need WikiLeaks. We'd have our newspapers doing their job to keep public officials to account, to keep them responsible to the public, to serve the public and not the state, which is what is happening with the media all across. As I was speaking with James here about what's happened to ABC here. They're almost a wing of the state. So, and that's the same with private newspapers that are not in any way owned by the state, but they could just might as well be by the way that they sycophantically publish whatever government officials tell them without questioning. On our behalf, I'm in corporate media, so I know the insides and how it works. I work for big Murdoch papers like the Wall Street Journal, the Sunday Times of London. So I know the inside, and I'm glad I got the hell out. And I'm the editor of Consortium News now and taking part in the Assange defense. So if we're going to keep anything left of our democracies right now, given the failure of the media, we absolutely need WikiLeaks. We need Assange to continue to work and to be free to do what he wants. And it would be highly symbolic if he were to be freed, because it would show that this was a great victory in defense of the public and free media, which is.
So, perhaps our next guest, we were going to intersperse it between takes, because we have Caitlin Johnson and former Ambassador Tony Kevin. But I think that we're really in the spirit of the live at the moment. First time I heard James Cogan talk was alongside John Pilcher at Town Hall last year, about July. That's why I was so keen to have James come along. So we're really delighted to have James here now. And please welcome James to the stage.
Which one am I speaking into? Am I speaking into this one? Look, Joe has given a very good outline of why Julian Assange must be defended. It is a matter of principle. So I just want to focus remarks on the action that we are proposing, that we are calling for in Australia to fight to secure the freedom of Julian Assange. We've called another batch of demonstrations on March 3 in Sydney, which will again be addressed by John Pilger, and a rally in Melbourne on March 10th. The rallies will be demanding that the Australian government immediately use its diplomatic and legal powers to compel the British government to immediately allow Julian Assange to leave the Ecuadorian embassy and return to Australia with a guaranteed protection against any extradition to the United States. Now, I was asked on the weekend, after we published the endorsement from Roger Waters, former of Pink Floyd, of these demonstrations, I was asked by a journalist, quote, what is the likelihood that Australian authorities will intervene in the affairs of Julian Assange? The answer is that the Australian government only intervenes to defend one of its citizens if it is in the strategic interest of the Australian ruling elite, or if it comes under immense pressure to do so from below. In the case of Julian, the establishment in this country will only intervene if it is more fearful of a movement of the working class than it is of causing frictions with its relationship in Washington. Now, we face a situation in this country where both the Labor Party and the Liberal National Coalition have refused to take any steps to defend Assange because they are completely committed to the US-Australia military alliance. They are just as hostile to WikiLeaks as the US is. We know, however, that pressure can shift government policy. In its dying days, the Howard government did take diplomatic initiatives to assist the return of persecuted David Hicks from Guantanamo Bay. In 2015, the coalition government did take diplomatic action to secure the return to Australia of persecuted journalist Peter Grester. And in recent days, we have witnessed the very, very welcome return to Australia of Hakim El-Aribi, freed from detention in Thailand and protected from extradition to Bahrain as a result of the courageous actions of the Australian and international football community, particularly led by Craig Foster. Now, the difference with Assange is that what was once presented in this country and internationally as the liberal or democratic wing of the establishment, such as the ABC and the Fairfax Press, such as the Greens and the Parliamentary Independents, such as the trade unions, they are all silent, and they have all lined up in the persecution of Assange, because just as much as the establishment parties, they are supporting the US alliance and the confrontation being developed against China. You cannot rely on any of those organizations to defend Assange. Now, there is an enormous disconnect between official policy and the way masses of people think and feel about Assange and WikiLeaks. There is immense public support, but it finds no expression either in the parliament or in the mass media. The silence will be broken by the development of a completely independent, new mass movement of the working class in open opposition to the establishment. The future of whistleblowing, and in that sense, the future of democracy, depends upon the development of such an independent movement here and around the world. Finally, I just want to answer one issue that comes up. What can the Australian government actually do? Well, it can do a great deal. The Australian government currently has economic sanctions in place against North Korea, Iran, Russia, Syria, Myanmar, and others. It can impose them on Britain. Yes. Cumulative British investment in Australia totals $481 billion in 2017, the second highest amount of any country investing in Australia after the United States. The Australian government and its parliament has the power to freeze all British assets in Australia and freeze all repatriation of profit and income from their investments until Julian Assange is freed and allowed to return to this country with guaranteed protection. Such a move would not harm the head of a single British worker who are the ally of the Australian working people in the fight to defend democratic rights. It would, however, have a significant impact on the British financial elite who run the government. Now, I want to appeal this evening. I thank Cathy very much for the invitation to speak. I would like to join in Joe in appealing for the maximum support for the freedom of Assange. Certainly in this country, we would urge all of you here this evening to do everything you can to mobilise your friends, your family, your colleagues and so on to attend the demonstrations. As I said, they'll be addressed certainly by myself, but also by John Pilger. We'll be publishing tomorrow a very welcome endorsement from highly respected Professor Stuart Rees, who are also invited to speak. So again, we're appealing, as we said in June, we're not asking Morrison and the coalition, we're not asking Shorten and Labor to do something in defence of Assange. We're appealing to the working class to force them to do something to defend Julian Assange, to force them to intervene to secure his freedom. Thank you.
Just a little bit of rearrangement here. Goodness gracious, glass is gone. I don't usually need that much amplification, but we do, as Joe said, we have to speak into several microphones. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to listen to the words of Melbourne independent journalist Caitlin Johnson, who is talking about narrative control. I think this is great. And I think straight after we'll just run straight into Australian ambassador, retired Australian ambassador, Tony Kevin, because he has some very specific ideas about how to get Julian out of that embassy and diplomatic solutions as well. So we'll just play both of them. I'll just play both of them one after the other. So if you could just bear with me while I get those up. Won't take a sec. We did, oh, look, there's us. Just let me hide that because one's, yeah, it's a bit dark in here because, yeah, we had to give the lights low priority. So it doesn't matter. I'll fix that in the post as I always do. So, oh yes, there's the poster. So let's listen to Caitlin Johnson, one of our own. Caitlin's a very good journalist, independent journalist. And all of us independent journalists, we all have our pet love. And so we are able to research topics much more thoroughly than journalists who have to write about a different thing every day. So let's listen to Caitlin. We ready there, Ronnie? Okay. Oh, he's getting some light for us. That's so sweet. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Cathy, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me here tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't make it in person, especially considering the illustrious guest list that has gathered, but technology is a wonderful thing, and I'm so glad I could join you in this way. So as you probably know, I write a lot about Julian Assange. And I want to use this time to scope out my inner landscape for you to show you why. You might also know I'm really fond of saying that those who control the narrative control the world. And I'm fond of saying that not just because it's true, but also because it points to the solution as well as the problem. When you truly see that whoever controls the narrative controls the world, you can easily zero in on the inherent weakness in their power structure. And that weakness is that it is all reliant on belief in their stories. So when you attack their stories, when you shine truth on their lies, you are attacking their power base, because you can't do horrible things to people and to our planet without gaslighting the public into consenting for them. If they let people make up their own minds about their actions, then the people would instantly stop them doing all those horrible things. They must control the story about what they're doing. And that's usually by manipulating our sense of right and wrong, and by distorting and obfuscating abuses of power. So, as a journalist, obviously there are many bad things happening in the world today, and all are equally deserving of attention. But for me, few of them are as useful at pointing directly to the underlying power structure while highlighting its key strategies and outlining its weaknesses, and also showing people how to actually use the tool which we must use to fight them, as is the example of Julian Assange. When Assange started Wikileaks, he did so on the premise that corrupt and unaccountable power is a problem in our world, and that problem can be fought with the light of truth. And what did corrupt and unaccountable power do? It responded right on cue by detaining, silencing, and controlling the narrative about him, by smearing him until the outcry about his detention was significantly muted. So as powerful as the leaks are, it's not simply each publication of WikiLeaks that highlights the machinations of corrupt power. It's also the fact that the very existence of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange has created a situation where power has had to overextend itself, and it's using all its tricks right out there in the open in order to try and shut WikiLeaks down. Because ideally, inverted totalitarian power likes to work in its dark magic behind the scenes by doing what they like and pacing a compliant population into supporting it. But by watching who attempts to shut Assange down and how they do it, we are gathering a working picture of how power maintains control of the population through the matrix of narrative control. So I write a lot about the plight of a Julian Assange for the same reason I write a lot about the Iraq invasion. His persecution, when you sincerely examine it, exposes undeniable proof that we are in fact ruled by a transnational power establishment which is immoral and dishonest to its core. So what can we learn about this unelected transnational power establishment through the lens of the persecution of Julian Assange? Well, we can easily see that anyone who offends the US centralised empire will find themselves subject to trial by media, because the media are owned by the same plutocratic class which owns the empire. So to believe what the mass media news outlets tell you about those who stand up to imperial power is to ignore reality. If our news outlets were sincerely doing their job as the Fourth Estate, they would be reporting on the persecution of Julian Assange in the same way they report on the persecution of any dissident journalist. But they don't. That, in and of itself, speaks volumes. The media don't just stand silently by either. They smear him. They use half-truths, exaggerations, outright lies to build a picture of him as a stinky, Nazi, cat-torturing, rapist, Russian spy. And it's remarkable how consistent this characterization is across almost all these seemingly independent outlets. That's because corrupt and unaccountable power uses its political and media influence to smear Assange because as far as the interests of corrupt and unaccountable power are concerned, killing his reputation is as good as killing him. Now, if everyone can be paced into viewing him with hatred and revulsion, they'll be far less likely to take WikiLeaks publications seriously, and they'll be far more likely to consent to Assange's silencing and imprisonment. Someone can be speaking 100% truth to you, but if you're suspicious of him, you won't believe anything he's saying. If they can manufacture that suspicion with total or near total credence, then as far as our rulers are concerned, it is as good as putting a bullet to his head. Think about it. The mass media keeps saying to the public day after day, without raising any eyebrows, hey, you know that bloke at the embassy who shares embarrassing truths about really powerful people? Well, guess what? He's actually a stinky Nazi rapist Russian spy who mistreats his cat. If this doesn't show you how propagandized the public already is, then I don't know what does. That goes straight in. A healthy worldview, one that's unmolested by corrupt narrative control, would look at Julian and see someone who is circulating inconvenient facts about powerful people, while also being called pretty much all the worst things in the world. And you'd know immediately that that person is being lied about by those self-same powerful people. Free of all the manipulations, it's just so obvious who is punching up and who is punching down. But the general public can't see that because they've had their worldview reversed by powerful storytellers. So everyone should always be extremely suspicious of anyone who defends the powerful from the less powerful. And it's really amazing that this isn't a more obvious dynamic to people, but when you look at it, this is actually a long-standing dynamic that is only just recently being brought into consciousness. Power has long been protected at the expense of the vulnerable. Priests were being protected over altar boys. Media moguls were being protected over actresses. Powerful militarized nation states were being protected over indigenous populations, and so on. We can expect this to move into consciousness more and more as the old paradigms are examined. But for now, we live in a reality where unfathomably powerful, world-dominating government agencies are scrutinised and criticised far, far less than a guy trapped in an embassy who published inconvenient facts about those agencies. So when you turn the volume down and watch the actions without the overlay of story, you can see this chilling reality being played out. You can see that the relentless smear campaigns against Assange have given the unelected power establishment the ability to publicly make an example of a journalist who published uncomfortable truths. He's being made an example of, and they're doing this without provoking the wrath of the masses. We're witnessing a town square flogging that the crowd has been manipulated into cheering for. And the key is narrative control. That's the only thing holding this together. It's just like a web of stories that has enabled them to have their cake and eat it too. They get to act like the medieval lords of old. They get to inflict draconian punishment on a journalist. And they get to leave his head on a spike in the town square as a warning to other would-be truth-tellers. All the while having the public believe that such a bizarre violation of human rights is perfectly fine and acceptable. And on that point, I'd like to be really clear. This play is not just for the compliant populace. This story does have a dual purpose. This story is a warning to us. It's a warning written in between the lines for those of us who can read it about what happens to truth tellers when they get too much attention. So the real danger here is if they manage to prosecute and jail Assange in plain sight and with the consent of the populace. Now, it set an incredibly dangerous precedent. If the US prosecutes a foreign journalist for publishing factual information, then I believe that that would constitute a greater leap in the direction of Orwellian dystopia than the Patriot Act. And not just for America either, for the entire world. Of course, this would all fall apart in a hot second if the general population could see what we can see. no one likes a bully. And if they just turn the volume down on the lies they're being told, it's easy to see he's being persecuted by the same people he outed with his leaks. It's pretty bloody obvious once you strip it of the story. But right now, anyone who participates in the smear campaign against Assange and WikiLeaks is basically just saying extremely powerful people should be able to lie to us without any difficulty or opposition at all. Now, most people don't actually believe that. I mean, unless you're one of those powerful people, why would you? Most people don't believe it, they don't want it, and with a tincture of courage and some sincere effort to bring consciousness to their own actions, they will stop it from happening. But right now, that's not happening, is it? I mean, the sheepish silence around Julian Assange here in Australia is so creepy. We are a nation who will go to great lengths to bang the table of diplomacy and bring home citizens who have been caught overseas doing all sorts of really nefarious and dangerous things. But we're happy to ignore one of our own because we told he might have some like bad house manners or something. We're all just like, oh yeah, fair enough. I mean, what is happening here? Why have people no perspective anymore? How is it that judgment is so easily knotted into a pretzel? Why are these lies and half-truths so uncritically swallowed? Well, I think, this is my theory, but I think ordinary citizens find themselves believing the smear campaigns against Assange because the alternative is to face the terrifying reality that our government is participating in the deliberate silencing and imprisonment of a journalist simply for publishing facts. And if they're capable of that, what else are they doing? Once you truly grok what is going on in plain sight before our very eyes, what choice do you have but to allow the full painful reality in and see for yourself the trajectory of this omnicidal, ecocidal, dystopian path we are hurtling on towards our own almost certain extinction? Like, people have enough trouble sitting with their own personal death, let alone have the courage to look the death of our species in the eye. It is much easier to believe in fairy tales of Putin Nazi cat torturers and occasionally send thoughts and prayers for some kind of deus ex machina miracle than face the stark reality that our planet is in the hands of a few death-loving money hoarders who have no plans for our salvation. And our only way out of here is to stand up, stare them down, and take back the wheel. So you can see the persecution of Julian Assange is a thread that once pulled unravels the whole tapestry. His mission and his story both tell the whole sordid tale of why we are where we are and what we need to do to reverse our trajectory. And it's pretty fucking simple. We tell the truth. That's it. But we tell the truth on all levels of our being, from the personal out to the political. We face our fears on all our levels of being and bring consciousness to the parts of ourselves that would much rather parrot fairy tales than have to do something that goes against our tribe. We have to decide to tell the truth anyway, with no mitigation, like the boy pointing out that the emperor is naked. If enough of us do that, a tipping point will be achieved and the manipulators will lose control. So keep fighting and tell the truth in as many interesting ways as possible. Let inspiration guide you to the easiest gets. Often we get mired in fighting the most defended parts of the narrative when there is low-hanging fruit just waiting to be grabbed. Be spontaneous and be playful and keep telling it like you see it, and we will win this. We will get him out of there, and that will be a win for everyone.
Response that we were all, even when I was recording it, I was quite moved by that one. made me laugh. And then, you know, she comes down like a hammer at the end. Yes, with some stark realities. So please, yeah, oh, we're almost bang on time. So now I'm going to play for you our Australian ambassador, Tony Kevin, who was ambassador to Cambodia and Poland. That's right. So he's got very, very active in and some very good practical solutions for Julian's problem and the problem of a free press. Okay, let's go.
My first experience of
Tony
Julian
Kevin.
Assange's work was when I saw the infamous WikiLeaks videos of the duck shooting in Iraq, the murders of those innocent people trying to cross the square in Baghdad. They were journalists, I think. And I then learnt of the connection with Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning. And over the next few weeks, I learnt of the connection with WikiLeaks. My name's Tony Kevin. I used to be an Australian ambassador. My last postings were to Cambodia and to Poland. I used to be very much part of the Western Alliance Cold War against Russia. In fact, my first posting was to Russia, and I've written a book about that recently called Return to Moscow, which I recommend everybody to seek out in your local library or bookshop and try to read. It's an alternative contrarian view of why everything's gone so pear-shaped in East-West relations over the last few years. Basically, it's our fault, it's the West's fault. But now to come back to the importance of Julian, and he's terribly important. I've never met him, I've never corresponded directly with him, but I have in a sort of a way become part of the campaign for his decent treatment. This is about two things. It's firstly about his global significance as one of the most important campaigners, or the most important, I believe, campaigner for accountability and respect for the Nuremberg Law's principle that just following orders is not a defense against war crimes. Julian's work exposing all those documents that the United States would have never wished to have exposed has been enormously important in giving a whole population of people around the world a real understanding of how great powers behave when they're on the ropes, as the United States is now. That's the first reason, his global significance as a fighter for free speech. The second reason is quite simply as a fellow Australian. I'm an Australian, I carry my passport proudly. Julian is an Australian. He should be able to count on the protection of his government when he gets into trouble overseas. He is in just as much trouble in Britain as Peter Gresti was in Egypt or as James Ricketson was in Cambodia. And yet, the Australian government is doing boo-diddly squat, nothing, zilch, nada for him in his present predicament in England. Now, Australia is not a colony of the UK. We do not have to doff the cap or tug the forelock to our former masters. We're an independent country. We are actually in many ways more powerful than the UK these days. That's arguable, but I'll throw it out there as a proposition. There's absolutely no reason for him not to walk out of the Ecuador embassy a free man without a British charge hanging over him. That's stage one, getting that in the bag. Stage two, equally important, is for the Australian High Commissioner in London, a man by the name of George Brandis, to actually drive in his Commonwealth car, perhaps with a British police escort, perhaps not necessary, I don't know, to the Ecuador embassy, to pick up Julian, to drive him to Heathrow Airport, to drive him out onto the tarmac, which as a High Commissioner or Ambassador he can arrange to do, and put him in the safety of a Qantas plane, which conveniently has a regular flight, non-stop, Heathrow to Perth. Now, when Julian gets to Australia, some people, some cynical people say, well, of course, the Australian government would immediately hand him over to the Americans. Now, I beg to differ with that. I think once Julian were here, there would be a huge outcry if anything like that were contemplated. There would be the feeling, well, we've got him home, he's our fellow citizen, from now on we're going to protect him, and bugger the alliance, I'm sorry. So to me, it's a fairly simple game plan. We need to get him to the airport, we need to get him onto the plane, we need to get him to Australia. And then we can, I believe, safely keep him in Australia. We are a sovereign country. We do not have to kowtow to the Americans, and they haven't made any charges against him. And I think they'd be rather reluctant to once he was here in Australia, because we are a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Agreement. I think we have to be bold. We have to actually take our courage and try to see how it goes. And if enough people in Australia take this view, I believe we can make real progress.
Thank you. That was a terrific statement. The US Constitution forbids the classification of any information that would reveal a crime. So if it becomes illegal to publish information that would reveal a crime, doesn't crime win?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure you're right. I can't go too far down that track. I'm just a former practicing diplomat. So a little bit out of my pay grade, that sort of question.
Well, I mean, it's sort of common sense. That's one of those common sense arguments.
On a level of common sense, I certainly agree with you.
I was going to also ask you, why is it different for Julian Assange? We usually give aid to drug smugglers, and we give aid immediately to other, maybe they're just easier cases because they're just criminal, not political.
I guess it's different because of the sheer huge scale and importance of what he has done. He has exposed the dark underbelly of the deep state, of the United States deep state, in a way that means that the world will never be the same again. I don't think that people like Caitlin Osborne could have got going without the work of Julian Assange. I don't think that I could have got going. I don't think that the people in England who are exposing the Integrity Initiative and exposing the Institute of Statecraft and exposing the fantasy of the Skripal's poisoning, all this stuff going on, Julian has opened the door to all of that. He led the way. If you want to give it a religious analogy, he's the John the Baptist. He's the one who was the precursor, who made everything possible.
Well, getting back to a legal context, 40,000 cases, court cases, couldn't have got off the ground without WikiLeaks evidence. That's how many cases that WikiLeaks evidence has been accepted in worldwide.
That's amazing. Can I say something about the alleged connection with Russia? Because it's a canard that it keeps coming up over and over again.
Yes. One of the comments today, when we were talking, we had Craig Murray on today, was that it was a carefully scribbled narrative. I really like that one.
Well, I mean, what we know now is that pretty much whenever MI5 or MI6 open their mouth in a public statement, or outliers like Honorary Colonel Christopher Nigel Donnelly, if you see their lips moving, they're probably lying, because what they say is so full of lies, and they lie carelessly and confidently, and they've been doing it for centuries, I'm afraid. The British have always been very good at lying and very good at presenting a false image of themselves. I speak as someone of Irish descent, so I sort of know the backside of British imperialism, which unfortunately the United States has inherited in spades. Anglo-American imperialism now is alive and well. Unfortunately, we're seeing it again in Venezuela. I wish Julian was out and free to speak about what's happening in Venezuela right now. I'm sure he'd have a huge amount to say.
Oh, yes. Well, Rafael Correa did when he mentioned that Ecuador's non-intervention in Venezuela was part of the deal when Paul Manafort came to visit Elena Moreno, along with turn a blind eye to Chevron oil and let a US base back into the country. And, oh yes, Elena Moreno threw in the head of Julian Assange to sweeten the deal, because it was debt relief as well, substantial amount. Have you been looking into what the Integrity Initiative have been doing? I mean, we found out very disturbingly that they are funded through the Institute of Statecraft by the British Foreign Office, and that they have been engaged in smearing the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, but also Julian Assange through what they call the Spanish cluster, the Integrity Initiative being an international group of journalists, politicians, academics, and intelligence officers. Have you got any comments about the Integrity Initiative and what that's doing, Julian?
Yes, I've been trying to interest the Australian mainstream media in actually reporting on the massive leak of Integrity Initiative and Institute for Statecraft documents, which was carried out by the hacker, quote, anonymous, unquote, several weeks ago. It's terribly important what they've done. What they've done is they've exposed a massive British disinformation collective who are there simply, primarily, although they say they do other things, but I think that's just covering. They put out massive amounts of disinformation 24/7 about Russia, about Russian policies. They seem to be obsessed with the so-called Russian threat. They'll have a go at Julian, yes, they'll have a go at Jeremy Corbyn, they'll have a go at anybody who, in their feverish minds, can be somehow connected, plausibly or implausibly, with Russia. I think they really need mental help, these people. They are old, angry men, mostly men, a few women. They're fanatical, they're dangerous, and they're quite good technically at what they do. When they talk about setting up clusters, well, they're really clusters of disinformation. And they know that if you repeat a lie often enough from enough different sources, it acquires a certain amount of credibility simply through repetition and familiarity. And that's why they're trying to set up these clusters all around the world, because they want to have networks of messages going everywhere all the time that basically keep repeating the same lies.
Well, it seems to be a Cold War type lie, which is beating some drums for a hot one. But wouldn't you agree that there's some element of it that is partisan as well when it attacks the leader of a party, the Labour Party?
It certainly is. I mean, they are, if you like, the last roar of the old imperialist British line. They go back a long way, these people. Most of them are in their 50s and 60s. They're not young. Most of them aren't young. They're the kinds of people, I think, who, not to bring politics into it too much, but a lot of them would be supportive of Brexit. They're certainly supportive of an imperial Britain that, punches above its weight in the world. We have quite a few people like this in Australia too, unfortunately, but I haven't been able to uncover at this point any evidence of a cluster of influence in Australia. Maybe we didn't need a cluster of influence because maybe we're all in the bag already.
A long time ago, Tony, perhaps.
Well, maybe we're all in the bag already. I would say the vast majority of people in Australia purport to take part in public debate on questions of foreign affairs and foreign policy already are thoroughly indoctrinated in anti-Russian and increasingly anti-Chinese attitudes. I think a lot of them don't really realise it anymore, just how indoctrinated they are. Because when you put it to them, look, we really should have an open debate on these things and different points of view going up against each other. Somehow they always find a way to say no. It's not convenient, or the timing isn't right, or the programming isn't right, but they will never allow an open debate on questions of East-West relations, on questions of Russia and China. To most Australians, they only hear one side of the story.
Well, the source of their mental illness may be myopia of a kind. I mean, nobody wants a war, right? They don't really want to go the whole way. So why is it looking that way? Is that where we're going? Is it going to suit the arms industry that much that those kind of orders are given and obeyed? Or are these just career people who, as you say, don't realise what they're doing?
Well, I've been thinking about these issues for a long time, and a lot of my book, Return to Moscow, discusses these sorts of questions. I think there's a kind of a suspension of belief in the possibility of a real nuclear war between Russia and the West. They can, rather like George Orwell's 1984, they can reconcile contradictory ideas in their head at the same time. Orwell called it doublethink. On the one hand, Russia can destroy the world, which it can, and there's nothing America or Britain could do about it. The minute Russia unleashed its second strike deterrent force, it's curtains for all of us. I mean, that's simply a fact. And yet they set that aside and they say, well, no, Russia's actually a weak country. and it's corrupt and weak, and it's really just a big oil well and wheat farm, and we can basically tell Russia what to do. Now, this is completely illogical, because a country that lost 27 million people in World War II, that has been invaded repeatedly from the West, is not, now that it has a self-respecting, strong government under Vladimir Putin, going to let anybody in the West tell it what to do, least of all Theresa May or Donald Trump. And so these people are dangerous warmongers, coming back to Integrity Initiative and Institute for Statecraft. They inhabit a cloud cuckoo land of fantasy. They think that if they keep on saying we're strong and Russia's weak, we only need to get together and be morally strong, and we will win, we will prevail, we will prevail. That's what Donnelly loves to say. We will prevail. I mean, everybody should really watch his YouTube, the 8-minute YouTube, when he's doddering around in his kitchen, looking like something out of a John le Carré novel, you know, George Smiley on his recreation day, saying, oh, well, we will prevail, but we have to fight this war and we have to win this war. My God, it is so ridiculous, really.
It's barbaric, isn't it? Well, thank you very much, Tony Kevin, for speaking to us this evening. An interview style. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and please get yourself a drink up. And I also want to let you know that next week we are actually doing a topic on Venezuela next week, but it's not going to be here for a reason I don't need to go into. It's going to be at Humanist House in Shepherd Street. So we will be eventually moving, because there are new plans for this building that we're not entirely aware of, but we're going back to the Harrow Park Hotel in time. But, you know, this is next week, it's at Humanist House. And then the week after, we'll be back at the Gaelic Club here before we finally move on to the Harrow Park. So please come and hear, Chippendale, sorry. So that's just almost on Broadway. Very easy to get to. There's any number of buses that will take you right here. Yes, well, this is organised now. So the US intervention in Venezuela next week. Thank you very much, Alice. Thank you. Okay, so please get yourself a drink, and please, we need your help. There are so many people who work like hell to bring the entertainment, for want of a lesser word, but it is very important what our speakers come here to deliver. As Joe, coming all the way from Washington, please donate to help this 30-year-old event continue to survive. We really need your help more than ever now. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. All the way from America. Thank you.
Going right now from our point of view. Yeah, we're going to come around and get some getting ready to fire. We won't. Yeah, we got a guy shooting. Now he's behind the building. God damn it.
Negative. He was right in front of the Brad. About there 1 o'clock. Haven't seen anything since then.
Just fucking, once you get on, just open them up. Yeah, Roger. I see your element. You got about 400 meters out along this. You're clear. All right, firing. When the state line, let me know when you have it. In my
my dreams. I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks. Doing hard time for these Wikileaks. Trying to bring the truth out, man, it only gets you heat. And then they gag you. You don't get to speak. And when you get the leak, they try to hit delete. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Free speech, it's the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people of the red, bottom blue, you keep them in bed. Seeing the sheep, keep them asleep. Deceiving the weak, keep seeking the leaks till you cease. And I see your defeat until I'm deceased underneath a freezing red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. And outside my window a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey what my Mickey keeps, dying in my kidneys weak. Silence of my risky tweets is what the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace like 7 years under threat. Cause I've released 7 vaults, they upset. They under the rape sentence, but the US still insists to rest. I guess it's a sin to take the truth and disseminate. MLK to Gandhi, take aim and eliminate. And I don't say I'm great, just wanna say what's fake. But if they kill me, a million others will take my place. The CIA's post like a knife the sharpest. All hypocrisy, lies, and heartless. They want to stop me, my life, make my heart quit. Cause democracy dies in the darkness. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. When the vote count is irregular, you kill the messenger. You caught spying on a senator, you kill the messenger. Removing voters from the register, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. In my dreams, I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks, doing hard time for these Wikileaks, trying to bring the truth out. Man, it only gets you heat, and then they gag you. You don't get to speak, and when you get the leak, they try to hit the leak. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Playing on the regular, you keep the messenger. Free speech is the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people want the red, while the blue, you keep them in bed. Seeking the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leaks till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath a freeze a red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor. You the messenger. Outside my window, a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey with my Mickey keeps dying in my kidneys weak. Silence of my risky tweets, what the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace.
From our point of view, we're going to come around and get some getting ready to fire. We won't. Yeah, we got a guy shooting. Now he's behind the building. God damn it.
Negative. He was right in front of the Brad. About there, 1 o'clock. Haven't seen anything since then.
Just fucking. Once you get on, just open them up. I see your element. You got about 4 Humvees out along this. You're clear. All right, firing. Let the baseline let me know when you have it.
In my dreams, I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks, doing hard time for these Wikileaks, trying to bring the truth out. Man, it only gets you heat, and then they gag you. You don't get to speak, and when you get the leak, they try to hit delete. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Free speech is the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people of the red, bottom blue, you keep them in bed. Seeing the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leaks till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath a freezing red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. And outside my window, a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey with my Mickey keeps dying in my kidneys weak. Silence of my risky tweets is what the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace like 7 years under threat. Cause I've released 7 vaults. They upset, they ended the rape sentence, but the US still insists to rest. I guess it's a sin to take the truth and disseminate. MLK to Gandhi, take aim and eliminate. And I don't say I'm great, just wanna say what's fake. But if they kill me, 1,000,000 others will take my place. The CIA's post like a knife the sharpest. All hypocrisy, lies, and heartless. They want to stop me, my life, make my heart quit. Cause democracy dies in the darkness. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. When the vote count is irregular, you kill the messenger. You caught spying on a senator, you kill the messenger. Removing voters from the register, you kill the messenger. Need to silence any questioners, you kill the messenger. messenger.
So we're doing the Q&A now, and then we'll... Start the Q&A, and tonight, because we're going live to air all around the world, we have an enormous number of people around the world watching us. The people who ask questions, you need to come up here so that the online audience can see you. So what I'll do is I'll just get out of the way, and I will call the speakers back to the stage, please. And I would like you to come up. You can form the usual queue if you like, but I would like you to come up and we'll start the Q&A. And stick around, because the wonderful Alex Hill is going to close the show with a very, very special song for Mr. Assange. So can we have the first question, please? It looks like it's Arthur Chesterfield Evans who was broadcast. You will sit in my seat, and you can ask your question so that the audience can see you, Arthur. Thank you very much. You have to put this on.
Welcome, Joe. It's great to have you in Australia, and I hope you have a great time here. My question was, if Julian were to come out, the Swedes have now dropped their charges, and the charge I think he has to get picked up for, or might get picked up for, is skipping bail on a charge that no longer exists, which is a pretty, well, isn't skipping bail a charge on its own?
No, they've only threatened that they might.
Right. So in fact,
he would be. What is correct? See, the only possible charge against him is by Britain, which is the breach of bail.
That's right. It was just preliminary questioning in Sweden. They never got to the point of charging anything.
I guess my question is, in the separation of powers, the Australian government is not able to promise that if he came here, the Americans wouldn't ask the police or the prosecutors to pick him up for this misdemeanor, which would then allow them, presumably under the extradition agreements, to get him out of Australia back to the US. So simply to, I mean, how does that separation of powers and the discretion of the legal system play into the issue of him getting freedom?
Well, actually, he has been charged.
1 second, please.
Well, there's so many mics, and one of them should work.
This
Here.
one will
Okay.
work.
Yeah, actually, we know because of an inadvertent publication of 2 paragraphs from what clearly is an existing criminal complaint or indictment against Assange in the US. The same prosecutor was working on 2 different cases, the Assange one and some garden variety criminal case. And 2 paragraphs from the pasted into this other guy's indictment, and was then made public because he was arrested. Somebody saw it. So we could read where it says there clearly, Assange has been charged. That's a quote. Now, we don't know what the charges are because there was an attempt to get a judge in Alexandria, Virginia, where I live, to reveal this because it had come out in this inadvertent way, and the U.S. government prosecutors admitted they made a mistake. But the judge, in a petition from a group called the Committee for Freedom of the Press, claimed that because the government did not say for sure that this exists, this complaint, that she cannot make it public. So we don't know the details, but he's been charged. And if he were to come back here, Assange, and the U.S. asked for his extradition, even though the government says we're not going to reveal if one exists, and we're not confirming that, it won't be revealed until he's arrested. So I think at that point they would have to reveal at least to the authorities here, saying we have these standing charges. He's been indicted by a grand jury in Virginia, maybe as long ago as 2010, and that's why we want him back. So I think that's when we would know, or at least the authorities here would know, that there are charges against him. And if Tony Kevin is correct, the court here would not have the guts to send him to the United States, being an Australian court and an Australian citizen. But I don't know whether they would have the guts or not. It would be up to public outcry about that. That's what people are banking on. Please.
Into which one?
You may need this, or you need this as well.
There are 2 aspects to the question. Firstly, the reason why Julian cannot and will not walk out of the embassy is because the British have made very clear explicitly that they will arrest him on the bail for breaching bail in 2012. Because he breached bail, he would not be given bail again. He would be held in a British prison cell, while what Joe referred to, the document Joe referred to actually states that they will not reveal the charges until he is being held. In other words, so he can't, right? And so that's the reason, the urgency to that extent of getting Assange out of Britain now is that if he's forced out and he is detained by the British, that's when the Americans will unveil the extradition charges for espionage or conspiracy. So the demand against, but what the Australian government must do is compel the British government to drop the bail charges and allow Julian, therefore, to do exactly what Tony Kevin said, drive to Heathrow Airport and get on the first plane back to Australia, right? Now, once he is in Australia, the Australian courts rule on a US extradition request. And I won't try to go through it, but we got legal opinion last year. It's a lengthy legal document establishing that the legal grounds upon which the Australian courts would have to, if they had on legal principle, reject a US extradition request. And as I've said, before Julian walks out of the embassy, he has to have a public guarantee from both the coalition and the Labor Party that the government will stand firmly behind Assange in rejecting, opposing any extradition application by the United States.
Right here. Yep. I think this one is working. Yeah. So talking to that one.
I've been thinking about this, and to go from the sublime, which has been what Cathy's put together and what people have said, including at this table, to the faintly ridiculous. I got arrested for writing "Close the Camps."
Someone's knocked the camera.
Sorry.
Push this up.
I wrote "Close the Camps" on a billboard. Okay, so I'm going to a hearing on the 26th of February, which is not this coming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. 9:30 a.m.
And we can't quite hear him because you've got the headset.
Close the camps. Well, I think that Julian Assange is also in a camp. They've taken away his internet, they've taken away everything. He's in effect in a prison. So I would include Julian Assange with the people on Manus and Nauru.
Joe, do you want to point the headset towards them?
And all through the Gulag throughout Australia. So if anyone would like to come and speak to about Julian Assange on the 26th, because there's going to be like an event outside, they're very welcome to do that. Inside the court, I will read the list of names of the people who have been killed on Manus and Nauru, plus a speech, unless they prevent me. But if anyone would like to speak about Julian Assange outside, they're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. All right.
This is your microphone. I'll just take this.
Okay. First of all, thank you for organizing this, Cathy, and all the speakers. Thank you for taking part, being here. What I see so far is a violation of very democratic principles. We need whistleblowers because we have no audit systems on governance. And when audit systems on governance, which are fair, force authorities to be transparent and accountable, we rely on poor victims like Julian Assange to tell us the truth, instead of having democratic institutions to make people answerable. We have instead ideas of self-regulation. Look, Murdoch says that the press themselves have the right to self-regulation. Yet, when this self-regulation is applied to Julian Assange, he's threatened with arrest. He's threatened with punishment for telling the truth. And we do need to strengthen our institutions to make our media and our governments more fair, accountable, and transparent. And until we don't have those institutions, we will rely on more people like Julian Assange, possibly Stephen, when he talks on the 26th and tells us what is really happening at Manus Island, and many others whom we don't even know. So I hope we support Julian Assange, support people like Stephen, and all those who want a society that's truthful, fair, accountable, and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next question, Jim. Another one from the committee. We're an active committee. No, come and see it, put on the headphones, and speak to the world.
Oh, thanks very much to the panel and Cathy for organising tonight. I think, my name's Jim, by the way, Jim McElroy. The issue of Julian is an absolutely critical issue about free speech and, you know, the future of journalism in the world. My question is actually pretty much in the medium to short term. I have heard that, or it has been reported that there is a threat to Julian arising in effect from the counter-revolutionary tide that is sweeping through Latin America, and that is that the Ecuadorian government has in effect changed, and there is a report that the US is putting pressure on the government of Ecuador to, in effect, evict Julian from the embassy. And I would like to know if the speakers are aware of the particular situation Julian faces. I know there's another issue relating to his health, could we perhaps get an update on the actual situation Julian faces? And I am extremely concerned that there are reports that the new Ecuadorian government, which has turned to the right, could be under pressure from the US to evict Julian, in which case we will all need to mobilize really very quickly to support him. He could be facing, you know, a more immediate danger of deport. He would be arrested by the Brits and then probably sent to the US and end up in Guantanamo Bay or some terrible situation like that. So if people could give an update on his actual immediate situation. Thank you.
The Ecuadorian government under Lenin Moreno has been under immense pressure from the United States since at least, I would say, you know, since it came to office. I mean, already, even under Correa, the president who granted asylum, Julian Assange's internet access was cut off on the eve of the US presidential election on the allegation of, on US allegations he was interfering in the US election. Now, once Moreno came to power, yes, what our friend referred to is exactly the case. I mean, immense economic, political, strategic pressure has been placed on the Ecuadorian capitalist class to shift back into an alignment with the United States due to the collapse of their gas prices and other issues. I mean, the ability of these left regimes in South America, such as, you know, Venezuela and so on, to economically defy imperialism, more or less has collapsed. And so they're all now flipping back into the US camp. And sorry, just to make the point, I mean, in March 2018, the Ecuadorian government cut off all communication by Julian Assange to the outside world and imposed draconian restrictions on his ability to receive personal visitors, even to communicate by phone with his family, his children, his mother, his father, and so on. Those are the conditions under which Julian Assange has lived for coming on a year, on top of the tremendous problems of having to live inside a confined building without access to direct sunlight or medical treatment. So the Ecuadorian, yes, I think the basics, the only reason the Moreno government, I'll just finish, the only reason the Moreno government hasn't thrown him out so far is, one, out of concerns of the response of the Ecuadorian people, and two, as a result of the renewed and important international campaign which is being waged primarily outside of really the traditional political structures and media organisations, particularly over the last several years.
That's right, they want to force him out. That's why they're making the conditions so bad there. And I think he was given the condition that he could get internet access again if he refrained from any comments on politics. And he refused, of course.
We have someone down here who may want to ask a question. You raised your hand. Would you like to come up? And there's a lady who put her hand up first, who will just make her way up.
Can we get concluding remarks? 2 seconds.
Yes. We're finishing with Alex as well. This is our second last question, the gentleman there as well. Yes. Come and sit in my spot. So.
I'd just like to ask, what took the Australians such a long time to react? Because he's been there 6 years. I mean, you know, it's becoming crucial now. Why didn't they react earlier? Sorry, that's it.
Yes. Well, you know, this business of interfering in an election, isn't that what every journalist does when they write political commentary?
Please pick me up.
Which journalist doesn't, in one way, have influence on how people vote? So this is, you know, it's a canard, it's ridiculous. I'd like to pass the word to my fellow, my guests, sorry, to make some concluding remarks. And then when we're finished, would you, sorry, the gentleman there, would you like to just ask some question? Just, you want to do it from there? From there? You can come up, come up. I don't mind doing it. You've just got a loud voice, I remember. In front of the camera, in front of the camera. This one. Sorry, which one? This one? Yes. Oh, well, that'll do.
All right, my name's Holger Kofod. You've mentioned George Brandis, our Australian ambassador, isn't he?
Yes.
He was the Attorney General under John Howard. He called David Hicks a terrorist and a criminal. Now, John Howard, he's alleged to be a war criminal. Now, thanks to George Brandis, David Hicks came back to Australia. He wrote a book of his experiences, and he was not allowed to collect the royalties because they were considered to be the proceeds of crime. Now, John Howard, our unindicted alleged war criminal Prime Minister, who's enjoying the lurks and perks and honours due to an honourable patriotic leader of this country, he has also written a book or two. Now, what is the chance of John Howard's books being called the proceeds of war crimes?
Yes.
One little thing I'd like to say. Last time I saw Keith Suter, he said that would have been about 18 months ago. He was on his way to London, he said, to interview Julian Assange. I never found out how he got on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was great. So now I'd just like to pass final words, spoken words, because you'll all know, I would really love you to sing along with the last song that Alex is going to play. Let's hear what they have to say first. Story behind this. Okay, Lauria.
Thank you, Cathy, for organizing this and for everyone coming out. I just want to read a quote and see if anybody can guess who said this. I think it's extremely relevant. Talking about the U.S., in the First Amendment, the founding fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government, and paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die of foreign fevers and foreign shot and shell. That was Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black in his majority opinion in the Pentagon Papers decision in the U.S. Supreme Court. I think those words are extremely relevant when we talk about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Thank you.
Just a very brief response to the question. The reason why there has not been a significant movement in defense of Assange is because in 2010, virtually every media organisation, the trade unions, the Greens, they all came forward and vowed that they would defend a persecuted Australian journalist and citizen. Jed, the leader of the trade union movement, said in 2010, WikiLeaks has broken no law, and as an Australian citizen, Julian Assange should be supported by the Australian government. Today, within weeks, within months, the trade unions abandoned any pretense of defending Assange after you had revolution in Tunisia and revolution in Egypt, provoked in part by the exposures made of criminal corruption of government by WikiLeaks. Around the world, there was just like a shift into the camp of the ruling class by the unions, the so-called left parties. They abandoned Assange. That's why there hasn't been a movement. And Caitlin made an important point in her conclusion. One of the most important things we have to do is tell the truth. And one of the most important parts of telling the truth is naming the names of those who won't defend Assange. The unions, Labor, the Greens, Wilkie, right? You are not going to build a movement to defend Assange and educate people as to what's going on unless you educate them into how he's being portrayed. Now, just finally, I was reminded I didn't actually let any of you know what time or where the rallies were. The Sydney rally is at 2 p.m. on Sunday, the March 3rd. It is at the Martin Place Amphitheatre. As I said, it'll be addressed by John Pilger and hopefully others, including himself. The rally in Melbourne is taking place on Sunday, March 10th at 1 p.m. and that will be on the steps of the Melbourne State Library in Swanston Street, which is a traditional place of demonstrations in that city. Thank you. One last word to the audience here. We have brought along posters advertising the rally. I don't know if any of you have shops or workplaces where you can put up posters, but if you can, you can take as many as you like. Thank you.
So I think our technology. I think we started our show with a bit of magic. Now this story it concerns Alex's fellow musician in London, the other violinist who composed and played that beautiful song at the beginning. So he tried to play this song outside the Ecuadorian embassy, and he was forbidden to do so. So now Alex is going to play that song for Julian right now in Sydney, but she's going out to the world, and she's told me that she's actually studied his version of it. So this is a homage to Alex Taylor, as well as the wonderful Julian Assange and the essential WikiLeaks. So Alex, I'm going to ask you to come up here so all of these people can see you as well. No, we have the webcam here. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll turn it around. Turn it around. Don't be silly.
Hopefully we can hear it too, Cathy.
Okay, so hopefully we'll hear you loud and clear. Can you turn her up a little bit? So this is one you all know.
Thank you, Alex.